For those of us who are joining in today, we're planning to discuss about the build versus buy versus assemble process of master data. What goes into each piece, how we define them, and ultimately trying to have a bit of a conversation about our positives and our negatives with the intersection of master data in that space. This is going to be around, hey, what have we seen? What have we learned? What have we done from various spaces in master data, a largely legacy space? So for today's conversation, who's here? Who are we talking to? I'm Jack Smith. I'm the lead sales engineer over at Synchrony. I brought Scott Edmonds, our CRO at Synchrony as well, who spent a lot of time not only working with the buy side of master data, but also been part of the assemble, seen people who have built stuff, has known a lot of the positives and negatives of setting up teams to do this over his career. Also, I've brought Sham. Sham is an enterprise data architect, formerly at Cornerstone. Cornerstone is a customer of Synchrony. Sham has done a lot of work to not only buy, but assemble and build master data over his long career. So I'm really hoping that as we're, running through today's conversation, we can learn a lot about what worked, what has not worked, what did you like, what you didn't like. But before we get into all that, Scott, Sham, anything you guys want to say that I maybe didn't cover here to introduce your expertise in the space?
I'm excited to be chatting with you guys here today too.
Thank you for this opportunity. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation.
With that, let's go ahead and jump into it. What is the build situation, the buy situation, and the assemble situation for master data? And what goes into that? Not just the technology, but also the people, also the process, because technology isn't always the be-all, end-all of these kinds of pieces. Now, before we get into that conversation, though, let's define what we're saying build is, what we're saying buy is, and what we're saying assemble. I'm certain you've been to a build-buy conversation for some part of technology, for some process where they say buying is better than building because of XYZ. But let's actually define this. We're calling build, hey, I have a team of engineers and I want to spin up something in data warehouses or my own tool for master data, whether you're doing that in an Oracle environment, in a Microsoft environment, or something proprietary. The idea is that you are starting with engineers and building something from the ground up, tailor-made to what you're talking about. If we talk about the buy situation, that's something like Synchrony, this idea that you can buy largely a managed architecture that does the master data for you. Regardless of domain, you don't need to hire engineers and you can have something that solves that problem. The piece in the middle is more of your assemble path. Those are your buy a data warehouse, buy a bunch of different piece-made tools to create a skeleton of a master data. That's not always wrong either. There's benefits to doing that as well. There's negatives too, but you can get a lot of the job done for some people. And so the assemble is that more multi-tool, smaller contract, not exactly master data centralized, but getting the idea together. So that's how we're defining the space for today's conversation. Let's talk about assemble because that's the least defined space. Scott, you and I had some conversation around the modern data stack and how people are building master data on these kinds of solutions. And then, Sham, I want to hear your thoughts on assemble, what the process looks like, what you've seen, what you've learned, what benefits are, and ultimately some drawbacks.
I think it really came up through a lot of venture-backed companies building really excellent pieces of the data stack or the master data layer. If you really think about the core architect of the master or the modern data stack, I'm going to source data from all my business applications using an ETL process. I'm going to put it into a data warehouse. I'm going to run some observability and some transformations on top of that to keep stuff organized and turn it into the kind of data products that I want. I'm then going to take something like a reverse ETL tool. I'm going to port it back out into specific individual fields into my CRM or my marketing system or my support system so that all these different teams could theoretically be on the same page from a data perspective. It kind of makes ultimately the data warehouse really the most important part of that stack. The compelling part is that it can be really inexpensive to get into. It's all these tools have very much pay as you go, pay as you use aspects to it. And so you can build a modern data stack for not a lot of money. That's the net of it.
With respect to assemble, from my experience, I've seen more often than not, people, the decision makers of a given company that you're working with or that wants to implement master data management as a program, it gets inputs from their data people, a bit of it from here and from there, and they end up buying products that may not really fulfill their needs. So at least that is what I have seen, in terms of the assembling part of it. Now, again, the advantage of assembling is, like you rightly said, you can narrow it down to the exact problem statement, and you can fix that particular problem statement by buying the right tools. But then, with respect to assembling it, I think from my experience, mostly what happens is, they go on for a big bang, one or two applications, and try and bring them together without even
Okay.
understanding the basic.
Assemble's kind of like the new thing that people have been
Yeah.
thinking about over the last, I don't know, let me just roughly call it 6, 8 years.
Assemble feels like the easiest to just happen because you already have one or two tools, you already have one or two contracts. It doesn't require new people resources. But I think because of that, it's easy to lose sight of what you're trying to really accomplish because you don't really need a large people infrastructure to run an assembled process. You have people who own tool X, people who own tool Y.
Right.
There's no centralization of that process.
Two places where I see it getting weird. The flip side of that coin of like, man, it's easy to get started. This stuff is cheap. You can swipe a credit card practically and just be spending double-digit dollars for a little while to get something started. I was talking to somebody very recently who built a stack out. It largely does what it wants to do. I could quibble with some of the impact and results, but what was for, which was totally acceptable to his executive team when he started, is now like 10x. Like it's a pretty significant amount of spend for what it's turned into. Just and he's managing 4 different vendors in this particular instance, and they've all got different pricing models, and they all different think about the problem slightly different in terms of what the value point is and how they charge, and so it's difficult to keep it under rein. But I mean, Sean, you said something interesting too. Even though this idea of like I'm going to get everything mastered and cleaned, you're saying what you kind of see is that it kind of turns into just a couple applications as opposed to like the broader set of company-wide data. Did I hear you say that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Usually, the understanding, the initial analysis that the teams are supposed to do before they even bring in a particular tool, right? In my opinion, is not done completely. So, like I said, you get bits and pieces of information from different teams within the data world in your organization and say, okay, this is the problem I face, this is the problem we face. And more often than not, they don't even have a consulting team to do that job for you, to tell you these are your pain points and these are the tools that you need to go for, right? And there are many tools to opt for. But the problem is, usually people go for these big names because, okay, that's something there in the industry practice for the last 10 years, 15 years, and they're the masters. Yes, they are the masters, absolutely. But do they solve your problem? Do they solve your industry related issues? They do not, or they may not, more often than not. So you need to be able to understand the data first, understand what problems it's causing you, and then assemble the products that you need, right? There are a variety of them in the market, but that's where I see, that the teams usually buy the product first and then end up doing a POC or some testing for about 6 to 8 months, and then they realize, hey, you know what, this one doesn't work. Okay, let me buy another one. So yeah,
I think regardless whether you go the build, buy, or assemble process, you need some sort of data understanding, whether that's a large consulting firm, a small consulting firm, some sort of internal board. Do you think that it's better in what you've seen, in your careers to go external and hire that consulting firm to help do that data analysis, or keep it in-house? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. Just interested to know your experience, if it's better to have someone external audit that data or if it's worth building a team internally to handle that process.
Actually, you're going to have better inputs than I on this one, but I guess I even have a question. The thing that's been interesting about it comes down to people. So I think when you're talking about an external agency, you're talking about additional expertise in people. What's very interesting to me about data from company to company, small, big, medium, you name it, is that there is kind of no standard for data, right? And I think this is very different from a lot of other product and software categories, whereas it's like, okay, cool. Hey, here's the best idea that you should do with our product, right? Iterate off of that. Change this core model to things that fit you. That is so different, right? And that's been my big learning over a lot of different years of working in data is very so heavily on what people need from organization to organization. So I think maybe as we talk about people a little bit and frame this within Jack's question around the externals, but gosh, I mean, how do you decide what you even need or want? Who are the best people to have in the room to help figure that out, Shem?
There's no right or wrong in this approach. Just that it depends on how complex your data is currently maintained, or how easy is it for you to be able to understand. As simple as, do you have a centralized business glossary? Do all the teams that use your data understand the data the way it is, or the way it is supposed to be? That's basic ground rules. Because I've
Yeah, but
worked with companies and teams where ABC means something else for one team versus what it means to somebody else, something else. So even
yes.
within the company, you do not have the complete understanding of the data that you're dealing with and how it is consumed or used by the other teams. So if you bring in an external team onto such a platform, then you're just adding chaos to the madness. So I think with respect to people, I think whoever is driving this entire data as management or as an operations or a governance committee, the person who is heading it needs to understand data first. They need to know what they're dealing with. Without which, it is very difficult for you to either combine a team internally or bring in a team from an external source to be able to do it. But yes, consulting is one of the key aspects of building a vision as to how you want to treat your data and where to get it.
Well, I was gonna say, and you think that like external consultants slash referees are more effective than trying for a company to, in your experience, to just try to sort of try to project manage and execute internally?
Yes, I mean, I've seen. I would say yes. I think an external team would do a much better job in terms of project managing these visions or these goals, and to be able to bring it in, because they come with a fresh pair of eyes, and they're not biased towards a specific team or a data set that they're dealing with. I would always be inclined towards getting an external team to be able to consult the structure or the data that you're dealing with.
Is it fair to say, Sham, in that case, that in your opinion, before you tackle a master data project and either choose to assemble, buy, or build something, you really have to have that rock solid foundation understanding of, here's my dictionary, here's how the data is architected, here's how it's structured, to be able to be effective and actually produce that tangible master data project?
Absolutely. If you do not know what you're dealing with, how are you even going to prescribe what you need for it? So if I go to a doctor and I say that, hey, what, I don't know what I'm feeling. I'm sick. The doctor is going
Yeah.
to first ask you, okay, how are you feeling? What are the symptoms, right? So you need to know the symptoms of your data. You need to know what is it that it could be as simple as this, right? You have multiple sources of data that is coming and sitting in the data warehouse, and then you have an ETL process, and then that comes and sits on your BI layer. But what is the amount of massaging that you do for you to be able to represent that to your higher ups, or to be able to run them and get those numbers out, right? Which is basically consumed. That makes the difference. You need to know the amount of data that you have, the amount of issues that you have with your data, at least at a very big scale, to
Yeah.
be able to sit and decide and say, okay, these are the things that I need to fix.
I think we see this a lot of our customers and prospects too. Everybody's interested in clean, organized data. That's the fun thing about working data, is everybody's interested. I think a lot of people struggle to figure out where to start. What's a compelling cross-departmental thing beyond just like an analytics warehouse or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, see, that's what I mean. I mean, when I said that you need to know what's wrong with your data, at least you should know where to start, right? If you don't even know where to start, then that's a problem in itself. So I think a couple of teams that I've worked with, they use a certain data set day in, day out, and they go ahead and update it. And then a week down the line, they see that the data has changed. And then they don't know who's changed it, because they don't even know who are the other consumers of that particular data. Right. And these are authorization issues, or rather, authorizations that are given to multiple teams to update the same data set. Right. So that's as simple as it can get. That's the grassroots level of your data operations management, right? You need to know what are the controls you have, what are the basic operating processes that you carry to ensure that it doesn't disrupt what other teams are doing, right? So, like you rightly said, you can definitely go to the doctor, and then you take those medicines, and then eventually you get to know as to what the problem is. But for you to be able to understand that, you need to know that you are sick in the first place.
Right.
Right. That's what I'm trying to say. You need to know that you're sick, and then you go ahead and consult and get those respective things. I mean, you build, buy, assemble. It's completely up to your capacity and your vision and your target to achieve what you want to achieve. But Yeah, I think that's the way I would look at it.
We've talked a lot about assemble and a little bit about buy, but whenever I have the build conversation, I always start with saying, look, no matter what anybody says, you can build whatever you want if you pay engineers enough, right? If you got enough engineers, you got enough money, you can build whatever you want. I mean, at the time of recording today's conversation, Deep's fresh on the market, right? I mean, just completely showing that truly any kind of new thing is possible. Now, how many other companies tried it before somebody was successful? Who knows, right? Are you going to be that one who really builds the right thing? Maybe. But I'd love to know, in a time where there really was a lull of master data products out in the space, right? That 2015 through 2020 era where there was really nothing new really defining and updating that space. And people were choosing to build a lot more. And when, even today, kind of shifting back more to an assemble or buy motion. Sham, what did you see in the build space? Really starting from scratch, defining teams, setting up those resources, whether it's people, technology, or process. Do you still feel that build makes sense for a lot of people today? What's your good and bad takes there?
I've seen both, that is build and assemble and buy, of course. My biggest experience, or one of the most learning experience that I've had with respect to build was with one of the banking institutions that I work with, where it was a pretty old team that did not want to buy or assemble, and they wanted to build everything in-house. So we had a team of about 12 software engineers who could build anything, at the that the market currently at that particular point in time, demanded. Right. So they built a data quality tool, they built a MDM, a small MDM tool, and then they were able to, and they were able to do a lineage and everything. Right. But the scalability was limited.
Why was it in this case not scalable?
It is not. It got stale very fast, or at least not very fast. I would say about in 5 years, it became very less demanding for them, because the number of use cases that you would get, right, from the businesses to be able to build a particular tool to cater to their needs increases, or is at its highest in the first couple of years, and then it dies down, right, because all of their initial needs are met. And from their point of view, from the business's point of view, there's nothing more to build. So all that you need to do is maintain what you've built. So the scalability in terms of anything new as a use case that comes towards you or your team, that dies down.
It's like it stops the innovation, right? It's like nobody wants to do it because spinning it up was hard enough. Now trying to find ways to improve could break the legacy stuff already built out. So innovation and doing new things kind of stops. Is that what you're suggesting?
Absolutely. And we were literally hunting. We used to take our templates and we used to go have meetings after meetings after meetings with businesses and say, hey, the tool that we have, why don't you come and join with us? We will onboard you and we will do this. We will do this for you. We will do that for you. And that level of selling yourself kind of becomes very, but exhausting, absolutely exhausting. And they start to avoid you.
Is that a problem of like IT and data, using the doctor analogy? We know we're sick, and the front of the house is being like, I don't really think we're sick. Is that part of it?
Yeah, I would definitely say so, because IT and data, again, this in an ideal world it goes hand in hand, but then it doesn't more often than not, because IT people do not understand data, and the data people do not understand the IT terms, right? So to be able to bridge that gap, you need to have that person in between to be able to understand both. In today's world, like when I worked with Cornerstone, I had that support, because you need to have that one person or one team in between to be able to understand both the IT terms as well as the business terms. To have somebody like that, or a team like that, or a supporting team like that, then it is a lot more easier. But when you build something internally, you're talking to your business who do not understand IT, and IT does not understand business. For IT, it is just a requirement. Okay, give me this. What is it that you need? I can write the queries on Python or whichever tool that you want, and I can give you the results. But if something goes wrong, the business cannot understand what you've written. Yeah. And God forbid the person who wrote the query left to understand what you've written.
If you think about the intersection, having that person in the middle who understands, it feels like it's a triangle. In one corner, you have your data people, the people who understand the functional underlying data. the IT people, those who understand the technology that the data exists in and how it all works together. And then on the other end of that triangle, you have the people who want to be served by it, the outcome people who could benefit from that technology. That could be front of the house, that could be someone entirely different. It doesn't really matter, but somebody who gets the outcome. If you think of the build, buy, assemble, no matter what you do, if not working with a solid team, if you don't have that consulting, whether it's a product or a consultancy or otherwise, it's almost like each serves two really well. The build is more akin to the IT and data people because they don't really have to serve anybody. They're building stuff off the data they have, the technology they know. The assemble serves the IT people and the people who drive outcomes the most because it's technology they already own, it's stuff they already know how to work with, and they're just trying to set it up that better. And the buy seems to benefit the people who want the outcomes and the people who understand the data, but not so much the technology people who are on the ancillary ends of setting everything. And so if you don't have someone who understands how those prongs together, or if you haven't spent time working with either the company trying to sell you a software or the consultancy trying to sell you the people process, right? Or even an internal team setting that up, you really could underserve that third group no matter what you do.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. Because you definitely need somebody who's able to understand that and bridge that gap. Otherwise, like you said, it always serves two segments of those stakeholders, and the third one is always left out. So I completely agree with you.
Interesting.
There's a lot of very good vendors out there, along with Synchrony, that do excellent buy options. I think that across the board, what it usually is people not really understanding that they're sick, and so the resistance to something like a buy is like, well, this costs money, right? Assemble, why don't I just solve this edge of it, right? Or build, hey IT, why don't you just build some stuff and solve this problem, right? And or let me just fix it in one of my departments, aka let me just fix it in my CRM, let me just fix it in my something. Buy is a lot more, I think, intentional. You need to have, I think, front, back, and data, front of the house, back of the house, and data all kind of agreed that, hey, there is a problem and we need to fix it. I think that intentionality, is a really good place to start from when it comes to buy, right? Because, it's probably the three options is the most upfront investment in time and money.
Absolutely.
But it probably, I would argue, probably yields the biggest results across an organization.
Scott, I think you're right. Take what Scott and I say with a grain of salt on the buy perspective. There's pros and cons to each. Yeah, there's no world where you can totally ignore the process and the people part and just buy a technology or let people just code everything. If you think about each, it's easy to underserve a group on accident if you don't spend the time to really handle this process carefully. Leverage those external groups. Find a consulting firm you like, build a team internally, leverage a tool that, like Synchrony, that wants to help you with that process. But really spend time carefully understanding that it's not just a technology problem. It simply isn't. And it's not just a people process problem either. You really have to handle both. Let them intermingle, let them exist, and have a group of trusted individuals that you can work this process with. Otherwise, you'll spend 5 years building a master data project that will ultimately fail. No one cares about it. And by then, AI...
Or is successful, but nobody saw it, right?
Right. Yeah. And by then, people will have tried to leverage AI and what follows over the next few years with something that totally iterates over the entire piece. Scott, Sham, anything you want to contribute? I'll take all directions.
I wanted to hear a train wreck story from Sham in your career, because you've done a lot of building, you've done a lot of assembling, you've done a lot of buy. I am curious if you had a short train wreck of a story that you want to anonymize all the guilty parties involved.
I've definitely had some very interesting experiences, and you'd be surprised that these experiences come from the banking industries, which are way more heavily regulated, way more
data volumes.
Yeah. So the thing is, when we started implementing data quality and master data management and data governance in one of the banking companies that I worked with, we did not have any of it. So we did not have the budget to build anything in-house. So we were given a task to say that, okay, I want you to go ahead and tell me what is the data quality scores of a data set ABC. And we started doing everything on an Excel spreadsheet. We started building those beautiful MIS reports and started setting it up. And we then realized that what we were basically sharing was just the tip of the iceberg. And suddenly they realized, okay, you know what? If we are able to bring out an MIS of this level with an Excel, then we need to be able to expanding this to the other data sets with a historic data. We immediately dropped the ball in their court and we said, no, we cannot do this. We cannot do this on an Excel. And then they hired a data analytics team who were good at Tableau and basically the coding guys. And they built the entire team up from the scratch. Believe it or not, in about a year and a half, the entire team was set of about 60 people, right, doing analytics and BI and data quality. And then comes a tool which was bought, right, which replaced the whole team. And we were like, okay, now what's next? Things like this can happen. I mean, with the ever-evolving industry, like you said, the deep sea. I was just reading an article about it earlier today. We don't know who's building what. And all of a sudden, you have at a click of a button, you get everything that you want. And in my experience, I think that is one part of it. And the second part of it is, this is something that I stress the most. And all of the companies that I work with, be it with the global data stewards, be it with the CDOs that I've spoken to, one thing that I always say is that, we need to have a proper roadmap. We need to understand what we need to deal with. And there has to be a top to down approach in terms of driving this through, right? Yeah. Because sometimes what happens is the stakeholders are not really open to accept these challenges or these resistances or these changes in their processes that we bring in, right? Some of them could be as simple as using a template, and they would say, I don't want to do it. And again, I'm not saying that they are wrong. It's just that it is not a value add for them. But we need that one person, one team to be able to tell them that, okay, you use this to be able to get here or to see this in the next 3 to 4 months. It's a very essential.
And that's the benefit of that third party that you were talking about earlier, right?
Absolutely. I mean, call a spade, right?
That's right.
That's very important.
It's funny you mentioned how fast things change. You mentioned DeepSeek. I don't want to get hung up on that for too long, but if you think about it, it's been less than 2 years since AI really hit the market as a consumable piece. Yeah. Before then, none of this stuff was stuff that anybody thought about. So I hope anybody listening to today's conversation, takes everything with the context that it was in. Right? Understand that things change. Maybe 3 or 5 years from now, it makes sense only to buy stuff because there's no point in building anything. Or the inverse could be true. You never know where things are headed, but think of where you're at. Understand the risks of each, and ultimately consider talking to any of us if we can be helpful in your journey.
So sorry, I just want to add one thing with respect to data quality, data governance, and master data management, kind of taking a lead in every single industry, every single segment of the industries. I think one thing is very clear. The amount of data that you hold, you need to treat the data as your asset. So for you to be able to do that and monetize that, you need to have a strong supporting consulting company or a team that you have that you can build within. If not, always rely on experts of data to be able to give you that and say that, okay, this is what you can achieve from what you have. And these are the things that you need. Because I think that is where mostly we kind of take a step back, or we say that, okay, governance and data quality, okay, we can put that at the end. Absolutely not. These two should be your front runs. These two processes, if you're able to instill them in your processes right from the very beginning, I think they have a better ROI than anything else that you can get. I have definitely suggested Synchrony to a couple of companies that I've already spoken to. So from my experience, I think you guys have a very versatile team to be able to deliver what is needed. And since I've worked with you guys, I know the brilliance and the expertise that you guys bring to the table.
Well, you heard it here first. We're happy to help anybody. Scott, any final thoughts before we close out here?
No, this is great. Shyam, I want to thank you for just spending some time with us.
Yeah, thanks to you both for spending time here. Feel free to find us at synchrony.com. Check us out on LinkedIn. You can find Scott, Shyam, and myself from there, whether it's post for this or ultimately just pointing in the direction there. Thank you so much. I hope this was helpful to you. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us. Thanks.